You insult your maker when you exploit the powerless. When you're kind to the poor, you honor God. Proverbs 14:31, the Message. Sex trafficking is believed to be only a foreign issue. Many organizations today are fighting to liberate victims abroad and to bring the perpetrators to justice. Unfortunately, many people are not aware that this issue is within our own borders. It is important to look into why victims get involved in the industry, their duration being trafficked, and the long-term effects of individuals who fall prey to this world. This presentation is a portion of my senior research project, and for today, I will focus on victims under the age of 18. For victims, entering the world of sex trafficking can begin with a simple yes or being obligated to do so. Some are forced to sell their bodies or commit sexual acts by loved ones, as was the case for Stacy Lundgren. In the article Selling the Girl Next Door, Stacy talks about her struggle with ADD and dyslexia and being bullied for it. When she was 14, Stacy began an online relationship with a man 8 years older than she was. As soon as she began high school, this man began exploiting her. Stacy was able to free herself from this world before being forced into a major sex trade that involved thousands of victims. Some victims are forced into the industry by strangers. This was the case for Liz Campbell. In the same source, she described being invited to a hotel party with a friend. Little did she know that the person who invited her was the pimp that would force her into sex trafficking. Other victims are persuaded or coerced into the industry. In the book, Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking Beyond Victims and Villains, Alexander Lukin argues that some teens drive their determination and strong will to own the newest iPhone or have extra cash to the extreme, that they would be willing to commit sexual acts to have the newest model of Samsung or the new Gucci bag. In the article, Fighting Fire with Technology, the author states, if a minor is given home of food, clothing, among other valuables, in exchange for sexual acts, this would still be considered child sex trafficking. Now, there are groups of people who are at higher risk of becoming immersed in this industry, such as runaways. In the book, In Our Backyard, Human Trafficking in America and What We Can Do to Stop It, author Anita Bells writes that when it comes to minors, authorities report 450,000 children run away from home each year. 1 out of every 3 teens on the streets will be lured towards sex trafficking within 48 hours of leaving their home. As a result, at least 150,000 children are lured into sex trafficking each year. Lutnick also argues that members of the LGBTQ community are at higher risk of being involved in sex trafficking because of their family's disownment, having to live on the streets because of financial reasons, or they want to learn and embrace their sexuality more. The time a victim spends being trafficked can include days, weeks, months, even years. This time is filled with torture, abuse, and emptiness. In the article, The Sexual Exploitation of Girls in the United States, The Role of Female Pimps, the author brings up the matter. She has a responsibility to turn out novice prostitutes by teaching them the tricks of the trade. She acts as a mentor, a protector, and a teacher of technique as well as self-defense. And she brings them awareness about sexually transmitted disease. She also acts as an emotional supporter for the post-turnout blues, which is a depression that many of the novices experience when questioning their decision to become sex workers. Victims are also subjected to the abuse of their perpetrators. In the article, The Impact of Trafficking on Children, Psychological and Social Policy Perspectives, the author states, victims of child trafficking experience inhumane living conditions, inadequate diet and hygiene, beatings and abuse, neglect, and denial of their basic human rights to health care and protection, resulting in lasting health problems. According to the article Punishing Pimps and Johns, Sex Trafficking and Utah's Laws, There are estimates that indicate that trafficking brings in $32 billion annually to the United States, and that a trafficker can make between $4,000 and $50,000 per person they traffic. This would depend on the victim's place of origin and destination. No matter how little or how much a victim is part of this industry, the effects are devastating and long-term, even if they are able to escape or are rescued. Most victims are removed from school, leading to struggles in their educational development. In the article, The Impact of Trafficking on Children, Psychological and Social Policy Perspectives, some of these outcomes include language and cognitive difficulties, deficits in verbal and memory skills, poor academic performance, and grade retention. Some of the aftermath with their psychological struggles include hopelessness, guilt, shame, flashbacks, nightmares, loss of confidence, lower self-esteem, and anxiety. In addition, the author states that sexually abused children can suffer severe psychological ramifications, such as PTSD and depression. However, there are organizations fighting today to free victims and bring the perpetrators to justice. Some faith-based organizations include Focus on the Family, National Association of Evangelicals, Concerned Women for America, and more. Feminist organizations who are fighting for the same goal include Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, or CATW, and the Protection Project. Another example of sex trafficking in the U.S. is found in the article Most Suspected Incidents of Human Trafficking Involved Allegations of Prostitution of an Adult or Child, in which federal-funded task forces investigated over 2,500 incidents of suspected human trafficking between January 2008 and June 2010. The same source states that in these cases where race was known, sex trafficking victims were more likely to be Black or white compared to labor trafficking victims who are more likely to be Hispanic or Asian. When it comes to geographical locations, the Polaris Project researched states within the U.S. with the most tips and crisis calls in regards to sex trafficking. The nonprofit organization found California, Texas, and Florida with having the most tips and crisis calls, with Illinois in 5th place. According to the article Dirty Little Secret, the Urban Institute has declared Atlanta, Georgia as the sex trafficking capital of the United States, with more than $290 million spent in the metro area in 2007 alone. Despite the facts and statistics, there's still hope for peace. Going back to the article Selling the Girl Next Door, today Stacy still struggles with PTSD because of her past, but she is living a new life with her fiance, her child, and is expecting a second. To conclude, going back to the article, A Child is Not a Commodity, Stopping Domestic Child Sex Trafficking, the United States is recognized as one of the top 3 destinations in the world for human sex trafficking. First step to combating this issue is to become educated on its subject. We can't help what we do not understand. Before fighting global sex trafficking, we must first tackle it within our own nation. Proverbs 3:27 reads, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act." Thank you.
For those of you who may be new to the conference, after a presentation, there's a question and answer period. Everybody in the audience is welcome to ask questions, and the speakers themselves, of course, will moderate.
Hi, I was wondering what you thought the government's role might be. I know there's a lot of critique on how the government looks at and treats trafficking victims, or just sex workers in general. Is there anything that you found through your research that you would advocate for?
Definitely in 2001, the government enforced the TVPA Act, in which it gave victims they treat victims like victims instead of putting them obviously in the criminal box. But in 2007, that act expired. So there hasn't been much done on the government's part since 2011. Yes.
There are many large-scale global issues, poverty, hunger, weapons, drugs. What motivated you to get behind sex trafficking?
I was actually going to go with a different topic, but earlier this fall, Remedy Drive came to Chapel, and the lead singer talked about his experience with sex trafficking, how he would go undercover and had to pretend to buy these girls overseas, and that got me just thinking about what about the U.S. It's not really heard about, and I really wanted to do more research and learn about it and hopefully educate others about it.
Alexa, you had a slide up there about the state statistics and calls to the hotline. That's interesting, but why is it important to know that?
I think it'll influence the people in those states to work even harder towards it. If it's more prominent, then I feel there would be a stronger drive to fight it there and then go from there.
Okay, so let me piggyback off of Dietrich's question with that. Are the states doing anything to intervene, to help, to put a stop? Or is this so large that it needs to be the federal government? This is your opinion, of course.
I think it's too large to fight per state. It's a good thing to know which state has more of a presence in this, but I think to a degree, I think it should be a federal funded, because we did have the TPA Act and that was doing so well, but for some reason it expired and it hasn't picked up yet. And I think when there's the full federal government influence, there's more of a possibility for there to be a change.
Just out of curiosity, what does TPA stand for?
TVPA,
Or TPPA?
at the top of my head, yeah, I don't have it at the top of my head.
She did remember in her paper to when noting that, write it out, so it's in there somewhere.
Okay.
I wouldn't be able to remember it either.
I was just curious because I hadn't heard it before.
You had a couple nonprofit organizations up there. Here we were talking about the government doing its work. What is a nonprofit capable of doing in this line? Are they only capable of taking and absorbing victims, or are they capable of going out and actually making the difference?
Actually, one source I did not include here, but as part of my paper, that there was, I think, a faith-based organization that was more hands-on. Like, they found victims and would give them aid, food, shelter, and work with the justice system in order to capture some of the perpetrators. So some organizations are very hands-on, others are more focused on the educational awareness aspect.
Okay.
Do you have any statistics about how many in the United States, and the overwhelming majority of them are drawn into this against their will? You talked a little bit about people choosing it, but the overwhelming majority is against their will. Do you have any statistics about how many across the United States?
Not with me. I think I did do some research for my paper about that. I think it was around 90% or so, or most. The majority are forced and obligated, and many of them are minors, and most are female. I know that.
Good, thank you, Alexa.
And while we're in transition, Trafficking Victims Protection Act.
I had to ask the one question, right?
Yeah.